Today we'll continue our discussion of plot. And we're going to talk specifically about the hero's journey, which is how to use mythic structure to tell your story. And this really ties into our understanding of human storytelling. So the hero's journey is really just a pattern of narrative identified by the American scholar Joseph Campbell. He recognized that it's something that appeared in drama, storytelling, mythology, religious ritual, and psychological development. And so he wrote a very, very academic book that is very hard to follow, that follows the typical adventure of the archetype known as the hero. And the hero is the person who goes out and achieves great deeds on behalf of the group, tribe, or civilization. And so what Joseph Campbell did was look at mythology and compare it to storytelling. And he was mostly about identifying that. And then we had a guy named Christopher Vogler who wrote the writer's journey, who took mythic structure from Joseph Campbell and tried to discern how to use that in storytelling for movies. And he realized that he could tell if a movie was going to make it or not if it fit into this type of structure. And then this Lisa Cron, who wrote Wired for Story, didn't necessarily follow Campbell, but what she did do was look at anthropologically, how are we wired to tell story? And that's the way that we are designed to learn and read and hear story. And so these are the best ways to reach your reader. Now, having said that, this is not the only narrative pattern that you can look for. There's other ones out there. One of them that I know my publisher uses is Save the Cat. Save the Cat is also used widely in script writing. So it doesn't mean that you have to follow one or the other. It just means that you have to have the plan for getting your character from point A to point B. So what I'm going to do is walk you through how you recognize these different elements. And then I'm going to use Star Wars as my basis for these. And then we are going to break into small groups so that you can pick out these elements in regular movies. And I guarantee two things. But one is this will ruin movies for you for a while as you start pulling these things out. Because two, nearly every movie made in the last 20 years follows this structure, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And I will add before we get started that Christopher Vogler's hero or writer's journey came out the same year as the first Harry Potter. But in a really weird twist, Harry Potter follows this almost exactly. And it's because J.K. Rowling follows mythic structure. So even though they were written contemporaneously, which just means at the same time, she's using the same structure, not because he taught that structure, but because that's the way you tell story. Let's begin. So the hero's journey describes the typical adventure of the archetype known as the hero, the person who goes out and achieves great deeds on behalf of the group, tribe, or civilization. And the Act 1 is approximately a quarter of your story, and that's where it starts in the ordinary world. And so when you look at myths, this is where they start out in their own local area. And they have the ordinary world, so you start to see what their world looks like, a call to adventure. Oftentimes, but not always, there's a refusal of the call. They meet with their mentor, and then they have what we call crossing the threshold. And the crossing the threshold happens between Act 1 and Act 2. The ordinary world is Act 1, and when they cross the threshold, they're making the movement into Act 2, into the special world that is your story world. If you watch movies, Act 1 in the ordinary world tends to be the first 30 minutes of the movie. In the same time, the Act 3 is usually the last 30 minutes of the movie. And then the special world is anywhere between 30 minutes and an hour, depending on who is the writer and who is the producer. In the special world is where we have Act 2. This is the try-fail cycle I've talked about several times. They call it test, allies, and enemies, approach to the inmost cave, the ordeal, the reward, and the road back. And somewhere around the time for the road back, this is when we have the second turning point. The first turning point was crossing the threshold right here, but the second turning point is the road back, at which point your hero is headed back to the ordinary world, the resurrection, and the return with the elixir. Let's see how that plays out, both in descriptions of each and how it plays out in the movie Star Wars. Keep in mind that you guys will need to do this after we get done here. You're going to break into small groups for your movie. So pay attention to what these different descriptors are, because the only thing I will have to give you is this photograph of the hero's journey. So in the ordinary world, the hero, possibly uneasy, uncomfortable, or unaware, is introduced sympathetically so the audience can identify with the situation or dilemma. In Star Wars, this is where you see Luke being bored to death as a farm boy before he tackles the universe, right? His ordinary world is boring. So let's look back at the description. He's uneasy, uncomfortable, or unaware. He's largely unaware of what's about to happen. And he is perceived as sympathetic by the audiences who understand this poor kid's plight living on a farm. Stage 2 is the call to adventure. Something shakes up the situation, either from external pressures or from something rising up from deep within. So the hero must face the beginning of change. And oftentimes change is not welcome, in particular in movies and books. In Star Wars, this is the moment Princess Leia's holographic message to Obi-Wan Kenobi, who then asked Luke to join the quest. So the call to adventure is teased a little bit when Luke sees pieces of that video clip, and then it's further solidified when he goes and he meets Obi-Wan and he sees the full holograph, so that he asks Luke to join the quest. Refusal of the call. This isn't always, but it is often the case that the hero feels the fear of the unknown and tries to turn away from adventure, however briefly. And this does happen in Star Wars. At this point, Luke refuses Obi-Wan's call to adventure and returns to his aunt and uncle's farmhouse, only to find they have been barbecued by the Emperor's stormtroopers. Suddenly, Luke is no longer reluctant and is eager to undertake the adventure. He's motivated, right? Seeing your family killed off will do that to a kid. Meeting with the mentor. So the main character has agreed to this call to adventure, and now they have to meet with the mentor. The hero comes across a seasoned traveler of the world who gives him or her training, equipment, or advice that will help on the journey. Or the hero reaches within to a source of courage and wisdom. And in mythology, we see this meeting of the mentor. Sometimes it's a wise person, but oftentimes it's a deity of some sort who is instigating this. And so they're meeting with the mentor to get those special cool gadgets. In James Bond or other thriller types like that, that's where they go talk to Q, right? And we get all the cool gadgets. In Star Wars, this is when Obi-Wan gives Luke his father's lightsaber. So we've met the mentor, and the mentor is essentially training Luke to become a Jedi. After meeting with the mentor, and I will say these can sometimes be manipulated a little bit, and some may come before the other depending on how your plot works. But typically when you get to stage 5, crossing the threshold is the turning point between Act 1 and Act 2. At the end of Act 1, the hero commits to leaving the ordinary world and entering a new region or condition. This represents the movement between Act 1 and Act 2. It's the first turning point, and it's where we turn from the action in the ordinary world and we commit to something in the special world. And the special world doesn't have to mean this mythological journey, although Star Wars does have a pretty concrete mythological structure. You could have this happening in a contemporary realistic fiction piece without all the mythology, you're still going to change from the ordinary world to the special world, which could just be another location in the real world. In Star Wars, crossing the threshold could be the cantina scene. It's that sense of we're not in Kansas anymore. And once he's seen the weirdness that is the larger universe for him, he can't go back to his ordinary world, and he has committed to take this journey. At the start of the second act, we have what's called tests, allies, and enemies. And this can be a series of events. So the hero is tested and sorts out allegiances in the special world. We see these working, this try-fail cycle of you try something, you meet somebody, bad things happen, good things happen. You're always elevating it from low-level stressors or tests to high-level tests. And then how the character goes through them, he or she earns special skill sets, so they learn new skills like the lightsaber. They also meet new people and gather allies, and they figure out who the bad people are in that world. In Star Wars, this begins when they align with Han Solo and begin a series of mini adventures to find allies and enemies. And so the first test in the tests, allies, and enemies is getting from the cantina to the Millennium Falcon. Stage 7, approach. And I want to be clear that there isn't just one test, allies, and enemies. It's a series of them. But when you get to approach, the hero and his newfound allies prepare for the major challenge in the special world. They're approaching the inmost cave. In Star Wars, this is when Luke and company are sucked into the Death Star, where they will rescue Princess Leia. And so they're approaching it, and have they learned everything they need to learn to succeed in their quest? The ordeal tends to be at the midpoint of the story. So if Act 1 is 25% and Act 3 is 25%, the space between the start of Act 2 and the ordeal is the next 25%. The hero enters a central space in the special world and confronts death or faces his or her greatest fear. Out of the moment of death comes a new life. So death and rebirth are a key symbol, key theme. It's very symbolic, and you will see that even if it's something like a young adult coming of age novel, death and rebirth can be being reborn with a new knowledge. In Star Wars, it's the harrowing moment in the bowels of the Death Star where Luke, Leia, and company are trapped in the giant trash masher. Luke is pulled under by the tentacled monster that lives in the sewage and is held down so long that the audience begins to wonder if he's dead. So this is the central ordeal as they seek out Princess Leia and are trying to escape and get trapped in the trash compactor. The reward. So this isn't the ultimate reward, but this is the reward for successfully, living through the ordeal. The hero takes possession of the treasure won by facing death. There may be celebration, but there is also danger of losing treasure again. So for Star Wars, that would be losing Leia again. Having survived death, beaten the dragon, slain the Minotaur, the hero now takes possession of the treasure that he's come seeking. And treasure is very much symbolic. So treasure could be knowledge, it could be skill. What is the treasure in your story? In Star Wars, the reward is rescuing Leia. Of course, what else could it be? Stage 10 is the road back. So this is approximately 3/4 of the way through the story, 75%. This is turning point number 2. The hero is driven to complete the adventure, leaving the special world to be sure the treasure is brought home. Often a chase scene signals the urgency and danger of the mission. So the road back is not safe. The road back is not easy. It is designed to be one more big challenge for your hero. And a hero can be male or female. So in Star Wars, This is the chase scene as Luke and friends are escaping from the Death Star with Princess Leia and the plans that will bring down Darth Vader. So they've taken this reward, the plans to the Death Star, and they're headed back to the Resistance so they can bring down the Death Star. Stage 11 is the resurrection. At the climax, the hero is severely tested once more on the threshold of home. He or she is purified by a last sacrifice and emerges from the special world transformed by his or her experience. So did the character learn something during all those trials and tests along the way? So for Star Wars, before I get into Star Wars, there's often a replay here of the mock death and rebirth of Stage 8 as the hero once again faces death and survives. And death can be failure, not just literal death. So in Star Wars, they play with the theme of death constantly. All three of the original films at least feature a final battle scene in which Luke is almost killed, appears to be dead for a moment, and then miraculously survived. He is transformed into a new being by this experience. And then the final stage is return with the elixir. The hero returns home or continues the journey, bearing some element of treasure that has the power to transform the world as the hero has been transformed. Obviously, in Star Wars, this is the medal scene at the very end. All right, so we have two things going on. The first one, we're going to do a group activity, a group think project, where you're going to take one of the movies that you watched and you're going to break down the elements into not just Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, but see if you can figure out what is the call to adventure. What are some of the tests? So you're going to write down each and every stage, 12 stages, 3 acts, and what you think they are for the movie or movies that your group watched. And this is really something I want you to start watching movies with this in mind, even though most of you are not writing scripts, although some of you are. It teaches you plotting and structure that you will in fact use for most fiction novels, even if you don't use this particular plot structure. You will have some that you follow, and learning this and learning to intuit it and pick it out from your reading and your movies will make you a stronger writer. And yes, it will ruin you for a little bit when you hit that moment that you recognize as, oh, that's the call to adventure. Oh, that's crossing the threshold. Because now you're going to start thinking of movies and books analytically. And that's a good thing. But wait, first, for homework for you guys, I just want you to pick a scene where your character must face a major problem that conflicts with his or her current direction. And this can be any character that you're working with or the class character if that's what you choose. The scene can be as long as you want. Limit what you share in class from 1 to 2 pages. We're not necessarily going to post 1 to 2 pages. In fact, we'll probably stick more to a couple paragraphs that show a turning point. But I want you to write the whole scene so you get a chance to work with and see how your character can change directions, and that change is a twist or a turning point in your story. That's what I want you to work on. For now, let's go back to your movies and see if you can pick out the 12 stages of the hero's journey.